Waylon asp usia et ekak o uia estia tani dene uia di dene jaksini tiona esta tei. So my name is Waylon Asp, and I've introduced myself as well as my Wolf clan lineage and my Tahltan heritage in Tahltan Dak'a, which is our traditional language. I am a Tahltan artist of Ukrainian Jewish ancestry, and my main sort of driving force in my artwork is autoethnography and narrative activism through indigenous fantasy. So what that looks like is incorporating Tahltan visual language, Tahltan written language, spoken language, heritage and culture into forms that are recognizable and inspiring to me and have been from a young age, such as comic books, video games, cartoons, mass-produced entertainment media, because I find that kind of potent emotional undercurrent and visual flair really, really powerful, and is very analogous to a lot of the bold forms and bright saturated colors and rich deep blacks that are found in a lot of Northwest Coast art and Tahltan art, whether it be our beadwork or carving or painting, our song and dance, right? There is a sense of liveliness and motion, and part of that kind of comes through by highlighting those elements using artwork that I've been inspired by since I was very, very young, right? A lot of my work takes direct inspiration from comic books, or this painting in particular, I was emulating a lot of Jack Kirby. As well, I also try to incorporate Tahltan specific elements. So this mask, this face is based on a mask carved by my cousin Vernon. Back in 1997, I believe he carved it. And when my grandfather passed, I inherited it, and it's up in my room right now. And I found the narrative, and I found the emotion present in the original carving so captivating that I wanted to bring it into this medium. And I've translated that in my paintings, as well as kind of building on that sort of narrative focus in the rest of my work. Other examples include this painting over here, which I wanted to utilize a lot of what I was researching in terms of perceptual color, right? So rather than a red-green complement, focusing on the red-cyan complement, and building on a sense of momentum and a sense of dynamism by having the orca move past the edge of the canvas, building on a lot of the storytelling that's kind of innate to Northwest Coast design. Like you'll see when someone builds a design using the forms that are present in our typical design language, they'll incorporate things like the orca's wail also functions as a character in itself with a voice, right? The dorsal fin becomes a raven. There's those faces here that tell a story and give kind of more context to what's happening. And if you don't take the time to appreciate those little details, then you might lose the intricacy of what someone's trying to tell for looking just at the whole orca, right? I try to incorporate those little moments, and those breaking forms to me also reflect the panels in a comic book, right? So letting the good example of it over here. These designs, colonial scholars have dubbed it formline, but what I'm referring to is mostly just the Northwest Coast design style that you'll see all up and down the Pacific coast of North America. There is a strong primary line that guides every single element in the design. In all three of these, you can see that it is connected in these specific forms. And then within, there's room for variation, room for breaking up these shapes. But there's a very specific shape language. And what I find so fascinating about that shape language is it's built for the materials that we're using, right? So when you're using a brush, it naturally wants to create that kind of curve. Everything innately kind of nests into itself if you start to understand how these forms put themselves together, right? And then to play with it and to break them up and to take that language and adapt and modify it is where I really find the true spirit of what I'm trying to do, which is remind people that Indigenous art is a living, breathing, growing, changing landscape. And it's not a single like monolith. Everyone is doing something different, and everyone is expressing their own indigeneity differently. And where a lot of people get kind of hung up with Indigenous art in specific, whether it's other Indigenous people looking and saying something's not quote unquote traditional, or settler or other onlookers not quite understanding how something fits into a box in their head of what Indigenous art is. Ours is a tradition of innovation, right? So if I look at what the ancestors have done and copy it perfectly, that's a great place to start. It's a great place to learn. I recommend people do that, and I still use that for study. But that can't be the be-all, end-all, because our ancestors weren't looking at the works before and copying them and then leaving that continuum flat, right? There is a continual growth and building and evolution, and we take materials that we're acquiring through trade, and we're using them to build our practice and evolve. And that's what I'm doing with my influences, right? I'm taking from comic books from all over the world. I'm taking from cartoons. I'm taking from my personal life experiences, which are not in Teltan territory, right? There's elements of being an international trading culture, right? That is inherently very Teltan, right? So to say that there is a language that one must follow, there is a visual style that one must follow, there are only two colors, red and black, that you have to use, it stifles the creativity and it stifles the potential of Northwest Coast art, but it also reflects the colonial mindset of Indigenous art and Indigenous peoples being static or stuck in the past or embalmed, encased in a museum, put in a drawer, right? The zine that I released, the little comic that I started to produce and then I'm releasing with the release of the show, details my experiences in the Royal BC Museum, where we went and visited and looked at a lot of different belongings. It inspired this piece as well, which is a homemade Halloween costume based on a fictional character that I created for a fictional video game. Over here, there is the store-bought version of that costume. There is a box for the game, right? With you've got your main character Georgette Senley, named after my grandfather, and they're a little party of adventurers fighting Queen Victoria. And then on the back, there's more information about the game. There's some screenshots, that kind of thing. And this whole project is just about bringing our artwork out of that museological, that ethnographic context into something that's more contemporary, into something that's more living, interactive in a way, right? There's interactive pieces in this show that highlight that as well. One of the characters in the party, this is his drum, and I invite people into the gallery to play the game, right? To see what it's like to play that drum and to feel that rumble, right? When someone sits here and they press the button, right? What happens is it's that immediate connection to something that feels very distant from them, but innate to kind of all of us. There's that disconnect where someone can't really experience the feeling of actually playing that drum, but hopefully it brings them a little bit closer to understanding that. And that's kind of what I want with this whole show, is I hope people, they know that they can't engage through my eyes, but I want them to be able to have some sort of visceral reaction to it, right? The title of the show, Stop, translates to awesome in Teltan. Essentially, it's a interjection, right, or an expression, and that's the point of what I'm working with. My dad would always say, when looking at art, it's not about trying to figure out what it says, but feeling what it does, right? And so I could go on and on about all the different inspirations and moments that have kind of shaped what I'm doing, but I think at the end of the day, it's just a matter of letting it hit you, letting yourself breathe it in, and then building your thoughts around that, and seeing where that takes you. So with the opening of this show, I've also released Indigenous Collections of Repatriation, which is not my first zine, but my first zine project that I've just made a massive edition of and sold. And what I'm working with in this story is retelling my experiences at the Royal BC Museum, where I visited with my great aunt Vera, who is a Tahltan archaeologist, has done a ton of work for the nation, and has really been a valuable resource in understanding our material culture, as she calls it, right? Which is the importance of our objects and their use and their form as a way to bolster Tahltan sovereignty, Tahltan pride, and an understanding of our relationship to the Northwest Coast and the broader world, right? A lot of what she showed us in that museum was an example of the Tahltan nation as a global trade, a global trading people. We would take our obsidian, which was kind of one of our major resources, and that would be the driving force of a lot of our trade. So you'd see Tahltan obsidian, I think they found it as far south as Florida, right? Maybe even South America. We would take the cores and we would trade them out to different nations, and they would travel all up and down North America, and then different cultures would fashion them into the different tools they would use. So it's the same material, but treated very differently across the continent, which is really, really fascinating. We would also, in our regalia, incorporate elements such as, she showed us a robe that had Russian gold lace elements around it, and Chinese buttons, and California abalone, and these are all examples of the wealth that comes through trade and through these relationships that are kind of lost in colonialism when indigenous peoples become a monolith or a nuisance or a point of a footnote in history kind of thing, and to bring that trade relationship to the forefront allows us to remind ourselves of the contemporaneous nature, the continuum of our cultures, right? And so this zine kind of goes through some of my experiences learning about that, but it really focuses on the things that I had to grapple with in terms of seeing our belongings separated from their context, right? From their use. There's a page in here. There's a page in here where I was holding a knife, and I wondered, the last time it was sharpened. There's so many examples of different objects in that museum that were encased in, protective sleeves or in plastic or handled with gloves or placed in a drawer. What that does is it takes our culture out of being something that can be passed down and taught and understood into objects that are photographed and documented and studied. And the difference there is, in a very colonial sense, the way that we understand history is through preservation of physical objects, whereas in Tahltan society, we preserve our culture by letting those objects decay through use and returning to the earth, and then witnessing the use of those objects and the context of them, like playing a drum until it breaks, right? When you play that drum, that is a far more effective teacher of culture than just seeing the drum hung up and studying its form, because you don't understand how it was used. You don't understand what it summons, what it brings out of people, right? Our ceremony, and a lot of our ceremony and material culture is meant to decay in that way. So the museum, being kind of the antithesis to that, was one of the major themes that I was tackling in this zine. I created it with my friend Amelia. She is a really good letterer, right? She was watching me handwrite the lettering and said, "Waylon, please let me help you." And I said, "Okay." And so, it's a departure for me in terms of what I've done in the rest of the show, because it is very kind of overt in my feelings, but I think that's what a zine is for.
It's also affordable and accessible, which is, again, the antithesis of what that museum does when it hides their works behind glass. Like, this is very quick and easy to distribute, and a lot of artists that I really respect, including Teltan artist Cole Pauls, started out working in zines like this. So I'm really excited to be releasing this, and a lot of people have bought them and really enjoyed them. So yeah, that is the thing I'm probably the most proud of coming out of this show, since this is brand new for that. So yeah.